Hello and welcome to Provision Screencast. Tonight's topic is going to be on the positive and negative impacts of the host country when hosting a global sporting event. So if I just get you down to here, this is a key focus then. So what you're looking, we basically have to say if a country hosts the Olympic Games or the World Cup as examples in football, what would be the positive and negative impacts on sport, society, economic and political. So we have to know, we have to critically evaluate each of these key areas and how hosting these global events can help them. I mean, we are in a fantastic position as kind of British citizens and English citizens having a look at kind of being linked to the 2012 London Olympic Games. So we'll use examples there with the occasional link to kind of the most recent games such as Brazil and World Cup, which was also in Brazil. So if we go on from here then. Our first key thing now, so have a look at the impact of global sport events on the host countries, on society, societal impacts of the society we live in. So the first key thing then, when you're looking at kind of, hosting the Olympic Games for London, for example, what were the key advantages? One of the key advantages is kind of the fact that you have an increase in transport links or the efficiency of transport links. So you had increased rail, for example, they had a specific Olympic-based or themed transport called the Javelin train line, which is a good one to just make a link there. Going on from that, the downside, of course, I mean, obviously with that you also had kind of the roads were kind of like improved, the kind of infrastructure coming in. But the flip side, of course, is that if you increase the transport links, you could also have the risk of kind of increased traffic, pollution, and congestion in the kind of cities that are hosting the main kind of events. Going on from there, there was an increased tourism, so more people come to kind of the country that's hosting it, obviously, which has a massive knock-on effect on economy. I'll put this in red because obviously we have to talk about the impacts of hosting global events on the economy, so you can actually use this again on that section. Going on, the downside, of course, is the fact that you kind of there's an increase in tourism, so you have more people coming to one place at the same time. For example, London in the 2012 Olympics. Obviously, the downside to that is there's an increased terrorism threat. Because of all those people there, it's a perfect opportunity for people to kind of use that as a political tool, I suppose. Next one, so if we have a look at increased employment opportunity, so when we hosted the London 2012 Olympics, lots of jobs building for new facilities, same for Brazil when they were hosting the Football World Cup and the Olympics, lots of building opportunities. But the flip side, of course, to this is that any employment opportunities that are specifically based around this global sporting event are only temporary. Okay, so employment is temporary, short term, and it's not long lasting. So going on from there, nation building. So the key thing is this kind of hosting of a global event can massively increase national pride and patriotism. Okay, so you get that feeling of kind of nationalism, kind of feel good factor for your country. So you feel like that. And anybody who was involved or remembers watching kind of the London 2012 Olympics will know that this happens. The flip side, of course, to this is that sometimes people can take it too far. Not so much in the Olympics, but maybe some if you're talking about football World Cups. So it can lead to this concept of kind of overt kind of nationalism and racism, which can also be called discriminatory towards other countries. Going on, by hosting a big global sporting event, we've got the knock-on effect, of course, that hopefully it will increase people's participation in an active lifestyle because they're getting to see lots of this kind of world-class sport. It can actually encourage people to take part. Again, as when we looked at the media and its impact on sport, the flip side to that is that it can actually encourage the kind of couch potato effect, where people actually would rather watch sport than actually take part in it. On top of that, we have this concept of increased social integration. So what happens is kind of saying that we get this appeasement within kind of society where people want to talk to each other more friendly. However, of course, you can get a massive impact here. I mean, it's particularly in Brazil, it's a good thing. Yes, society can all get on better through this kind of love of sport, but I mean, particularly in Brazil, where there was a massive amount of kind of political spending on the World Cup, there was also a lot of social unrest due to the fact that kind of money was being spent on something such as a luxury, such as sport, World Cup or the Olympic Games in Rio. But really, it should have been spent on the kind of crippling problems they had with their healthcare and also education. So it can lead to kind of social unrest or animosity due to kind of spending money on sport rather than the really important things such as education and healthcare. So that's your first one then. So what I'm going to try and do is hopefully be able to kind of hook those evaluations of positive and negatives. And we kind of say, if I gave you now and said to you, right, the impact of global sport and events on the host countries and on the impact on society, we need to kind of think of a memory method. And the biggest thing I always think is whatever things happen during hosting a global event on society, whatever it is that happens, it doesn't last. It does not last. And you kind of lots of proof and figures about this. So when I think when I think of the impacts on society of hosting a global event such as the Olympics or the World Cup, it's temporary. It's a temporary kind of high, I suppose. So when you use this, you kind of think of this concept of thinking, right, so societal impacts are temporary equals T temps. Okay, so the N, obviously we would prefer that to be an M, but it doesn't work. So what I'm going to ask you to do then is when you're remembering this, the impact of hosting these events is temporary. T temps. Now, if I said to you, looking at that now, if you paused it, do you think you can remember what these stand for with regard to the positive, negative effects? You should get the positives from this acronym, and then hopefully you can build up and do a quick critical evaluation using the same first piece of information. For example, increase in transport links. Okay. However, the downside to this, it can increase congestion and pollution. See what you can do with that. See how many of those you can remember. Moving on then. Okay, so now what we have to look at is if you are hosting a global event, what impact does it have on the sports that are involved in it? Okay, and I'm going to use the London 2012 Olympics here as the majority of my examples. So if we go through then, first one, the first thing that happens is there's an increase in profile of the sports involved in the global event. So for example, if it's the Olympics, you've got Olympic sports, which massively increase in profile. For example, cycling. I mean, the biggest increase in kind of middle-aged men kind of riding around in Lycra following the London 2012 Games as a result of this. So it had a massive increase on the profile of that sport because we were successful in it. Okay, however, the flip side to this is that it can be elitist and it can discriminate against non-Olympic sports. So I look at sports like netball, had no coverage in that kind of Olympic Games. I'm sure at that point it would have a negative effect on them because they're not involved in it. Now the R, I'm going to use this as kind of a kind of silent. And what I used to use it for, if people want one, is I used to use it and put the word, because I did it around the London 2012 Olympics, and say the Rugby World Cup. And what happened after the 2012 Olympics and in 2015, we actually hosted the Rugby World Cup. So what it does is if you host one event successfully, it can lead to other sports being able to host events. So you had, for example, Brazil in the most recent kind of spate of kind of Olympics and World Cup. So you had they hosted the Olympics, and then directly after they're now hosting, they then hosted the World Cups. So you had the World Cup and Olympics from the same country. So going on from there. There's an increase in organisation. So what happens if you think of the sports that are involved in this kind of global event, for example, the Olympics, have a massive increase in the organisation of specific things. So, for example, the national governing bodies of each sport have to increase their organisation and their efficiency. Also, the sports science departments that are linked to these have a massive kind of increase in organisation. If you're talking about Brazil hosting a World Cup, their FA, they have to increase the organisation of kind of anyone who's got to run in the game. That the flip side to this, of course, is that if you have an increase in organisation, that means that people are expecting people to win more. This means it puts more pressure. So I've looked at this bit here and think if you're increasing the efficiency of a sports science department in the Olympic Games, for example, this means it could end up, due to the kind of big pressure on people winning, or this win ethic concept, it could lead to deviance or the taking of drugs. So that could be a flip side to that. And of course, whatever the sport, I mean, even football not so bad, but certainly in Olympics, one of the big problems with the increased organisation of these kind of governing bodies and sports science support was that massive cases of people taking drugs. Russia is the number one example there of them kind of using kind of institutionalized doping, where they were kind of the state were actually in control of this kind of doping process. So if we go on then, next one. So as a result of hosting a world-class kind of event or a global event, there will be an increase in the amount of world-class facilities. For example, in Great Britain, we had the kind of the aquatic centre or the cycling velodrome. However, the flip side again to this is once these competitions go, these global events, often the facilities can be wasted. So for example, it can be knocked down, not used. This is the white elephant effect where they're kind of just completely used. I mean, a bird's nest is a great example for the China Olympics, where it wasn't really used after that. So if we go on from there, lastly, we have an increase in kind of funding for that sport. Now, when it was the Olympics, the 2012 London Olympics, it increased a kind of National Lottery funding for elite athletes and sports. Okay, but the key thing here, these kind of this funding from the National Lottery via UK Sport is extremely elitist. Okay, so it's elitist, and if people are not successful, it's withdrawn. For example, basketball as an example from the 2012 Olympics, due to the lack of success or the potential for success, it meant that kind of their funding was gone, which meant that there's a massive knock-on effect in kind of participation in sports such as basketball. So again, what I've tried to do here is try and make a link in terms of revision. So you've got these key kind of positives and negatives. So when it comes up and you see sport, ultimately sport in contemporary modern Britain, we know that sport nowadays is not kind of enjoyment based. It's based around winning, a win ethic, and it's professional. All sport at the top level now is professional. Therefore, we're going to use the acronym of SPORT. Whenever you see the global events linked to sport, use this. Sport is professional equals prof. So if I said to use the first kind of 4 letters of professional and add an extra F on there, that hopefully, see what you can do now. How many of those can you remember with regard to the impact of hosting a global sporting event on sport as a sole kind of concept? Going on then. Let's have a look at these. So we'll just get these last 2 sections done. So the impact of global sporting events on politics, okay, or political impacts, with the advantages. Shop window effect. What this means is it showcases the best parts of the country, which is a real advantage politically. So people can kind of almost like kind of angle it so it makes it look better. Success also reflects really well on government. It can be used as a kind of vote catcher. So, you know, can also be described as a political tool. Governments want to show this, so it kind of makes it look like they're really interested in sport, which is often what a lot of people like in society. Therefore, it makes them more popular. People want to vote for them. On top of that, during games, this might lead to kind of a political kind of harmony where political parties will cooperate and work together. Flip side, politically, of course, although it puts a shop window effect on the good parts of the country, for example, infrastructure, the downside is, of course, if your Olympic Games is ravaged with kind of drug taking or poor organisation, it can have a bad effect. On top of that, terrorist threat, okay, so kind of any kind of warring countries, if, you know, it could be a real good opportunity for a kind of an enemy country to kind of try and mount a terrorist threat. Also, of course, although it can kind of lead to people kind of working together or political parties working together, it can lead to mass protests against the government, which is obviously showcased by the media then. For example, the protests in Brazil about kind of overspending on things that a lot of society deemed unimportant. So, impact of global sport events on economic impacts then. So if you have a look at this, key thing, remember we put in those red things earlier, so you have an increased economy from tourism. On top of that, there's increased employment opportunities, so this can help the economy, and also new business and trade can be attracted from across the country because of how well the kind of games come across. On the downside, economically, the bidding process is massively expensive and can lead to potential debt. There's an example of Canada, Montreal, quite a few years ago now, and it was in debt for kind of 30 years trying to pay off all the facilities and stuff they paid on. They never got it back and they didn't have any legacy after. On top of that, obviously with this kind of stuff here, you've got this situation where employment opportunities are limited, long-term jobs. Okay, so that's that one that we talked about earlier. Those building jobs are only there where facilities are being put up. And finally, the last kind of criticism is that kind of, you know, economically, if you live in the kind of country that's hosting it, can lead to a massive surge in the price of renting or buying houses. Okay, so there's your key things. We'll have a look at some memory-based stuff for political and economic in lesson tomorrow. Make good notes on those and make sure you're kind of ready to kind of answer exam questions on those topics. Thank you.